In the 1950s, many rural areas and outer suburban areas were served by rail motors. One of these lines, close to Melbourne, is the Whittlesea line, which has had a history of closures and reopenings to be now known as the Mernda line. In today's video, we'll be covering the Whittlesea line's history and closure, geography and infrastructure, accidents, rolling stock, some stations along the line, where it is today, and will services resume. History. Now, the closed portion of the Whittlesea line is from Mernda to Whittlesea. However, that section isn't very interesting, so this video will cover the section from Thomaston to Whittlesea. On the 23rd of December 1889, the reservoir line was extended 18 kilometers to Whittlesea. Back then, trains would go via the now defunct Inner Circle to reach the city. In 1901, when the Clifton Hill Direct Line was opened, the line would be served by two different services. A local service via the Inner Circle, which would stop all stations until Reservoir, and a mixed country service to Whittlesea, which would skip stations when required. Direct services from Whittlesea to the city ceased in 1948. In 1921, the electrification was extended to Reservoir, and a new AEC rail motor service commenced beyond the line to Whittlesea. With the new rail motor service, several new rail motor stopping places were opened. Basically a sign which the rail motors would stop at if requested. There were 8 in total, and they were all shut down in 1959, when rail motor services ceased. In 1929, the electrification was shoved out 4.4 kilometers to Thomastown. The electrification was funded by a local land developer, and they also guaranteed no operating losses. Although the electrification now reached Thomastown, shuttle trains still went from Reservoir to Whittlesea until 1931, when the rail motor operations were booted out of Reservoir and moved to Thomastown. A Leyland rail motor was used on the line, soon being replaced by Derms until closure. In 1955, goods trains to Whittlesea ceased, and goods trains to Epping ceased in 1958. This spelled doom for the Whittlesea line. This would also be around the same time where the Epping quarry siding would be closed, which was a small railway quarry siding leading to the Borrell quarry in Epping. However, I'm not too sure when the exact date was. On the 29th of November 1959, the final Derm rolled into Whittlesea, with the section beyond Thomastown closing, until the very next day, when the line up to Lalor was electrified. I'll talk more about the reopening later. In the 1970s, the line was fully dismantled, which is probably when the disused station buildings were also removed. Geography and infrastructure. The section from Thomastown to Whittlesea ran exactly 23.6 kilometers. Heading north from Thomastown, the line follows the current alignment of the Mernda line, curving sharply to the east at Epping, and then curving north once again at Middle Gorge, formerly South Morang. It then follows Plenty Road until arriving at Whittlesea. The entire line was built as single track and lightly laid. Passing loops were installed at stations and not stopping places. The entire line was controlled using 2-position semaphore signaling and electric staff and ticket. If you don't know what they are, you better check out my video on them, which were used all the way until the line's closure for the first time. The Whittlesea line was lacking when it came to interesting features. There weren't any huge gradients, and the line would have climbed gradually over relatively flat terrain. The bridge over the Darebin Creek would have been the largest bridge on the line. No, not that one. It would have originally been made of a few timber trestles, but now it's ugly grey concrete. A few other trestles did exist on the line, such as the relatively small trestles over the Findon and Barbers Creeks. The 6 stations were relatively nice, albeit small, weatherboards. All had goods yards to differing sizes. None of the original stations survive today. Thomastown was destroyed in 1967. Epping managed to hang on until the late 80s. I think South Morang was just demolished. Mernda has since been relocated to the Mernda Recreation Reserve Playground and Football Oval, and has since become a part of the club room. And both Yan Yin and Whittlesea are just gone. Accidents. Keon Park 1932. On the 14th of October 1932 at around 7 PM, barely 3 years after Keon Park opened, John Varco, a railway ganger, was travelling along the line with his railway tricycle, attempting to reach Reservoir. However, an electric train, the count doesn't specify whether it was a swing door or a Tate, travelling in the same direction, didn't see him on the tracks. The train hit the tricycle, mangling it, and sent Varco flying. He sustained severe injuries and passed away while on his way to hospital, being transported by the very train he was hit by. Epping 2002. On the 18th of June 2002, two suburban Alstom Comengers collided when one of them was shunting into Epping Yard, and a driver missed a red signal. 334M was a 3-car Comenge on an up journey to Flinders Street. A 6-car Comenge was shunting into the yard, with leading motors 698M and 647M. 694M and set was empty and was shunting to the yard, as 634M was about to depart Epping Station. The carriage 698M itself crossed the points, and the next trailer, 1109T, was just about to vacate the points when the driver of 647 missed a red signal and collided with 1109T at about 60 km per hour. 698M was repaired and has since been scrapped, as it was a part of the chopper Comenge fleet. 1109T was withdrawn straight after the accident and was scrapped not long after. Rolling stock. Before the advent of electric suburban trains, photos from the time show small tank engines, E's and F's, as well as DD classes, and even some pre-1900s locomotives operating the line. After electrification, swing doors and Tates would run the line, as well as E-class box cabs. Beyond electrification, the rail motors which ran the line were Leyland and Derms. I don't think too many walkers called Whittlesea home. Then the rest of the suburban fleet ran on the line, with the exception of the Siemens and HCMTs. Some stations along the line. Thomaston. Thomaston Station was opened on the 23rd of December 1889. It was named after the suburb, which was named after John and Mary Thomas, a German couple who started market gardening in 1884. Originally, the station was a regional station, which really shows how far we've come. In 1929, the station became the terminus for the suburban trains, and also the terminus for rail motor services. When the line beyond closed in 1959, the terminus was moved to Laylaw. On the 7th of August 1967, the quaint wooden building which existed was obliterated in a fire, and the brick one which existed until 2011 was put in its place. By the late 80s, the need for a yard at the station was almost non-existent. This time, the yard was slowly and surely entirely removed. In 2007, received park and ride upgrades, and in 2011, the current station building was built as part of the Epping line duplication and the extension to South Morang. Epping. Epping Railway Station was opened on the 23rd of December 1889. It was also opened as a regional station, but a full-on passenger service wasn't warranted, so from 1924 an AEC rail motor shuttle was provided, which then became a Leyland, which then became a Derm. In 1959, the line beyond Laylaw was closed, but Epping was reopened later in 1964. This also coincided with the quote-unquote new railway station being built, now newest in quotation marks, as this was actually the old Glen Waverley building, which was just moved over. However, on January the 1st, 1971, the station had a small arson. During the early 80s, the station was rebuilt to allow room for Epping workshops, which opened a decade later. It covered about 10.8 hectares, and has capacity for 31 trains. In 2010, as part of the South Morang extension, and subsequent duplication from Keon Park, Epping Railway Station was lowered into a trench, which also saw the removal of Cooper Street level crossing. And that's the station we see today. South Morang. South Morang Railway Station was opened in May of 1925 as Rail Motor Stopping Place 39, but South Morang was also opened on the 23rd of December 1889. This is because there were actually two stations with the name South Morang. The former station named South Morang used to sit where Middle Gorge Station sits today, and I'll go through the history of that. I can't find much history of it online, but it was a small weatherboard building. In the footage, there was a former goods yard, and there also would have been a few sightings. There also was a cattle pit installed in 1911. In 1927, it was proposed that it would become an intermediate special block post for the Reservoir to Whittlesea staff and ticket section. However, this was never followed through on. On the 29th of November 1959, the station was closed along with the rest of the line. The rail motor stopping place also closed on the same day. The site lay dormant for over half a century until 2012, when South Morang Station reopened, but this time on the site of rail motor stopping place 39. It's situated on the border of South Morang and Mill Park, and it's similar in appearance to Epping's new trench building. This project also removed the level crossing at McDonald's Road. Now the two South Morang stations coexisted for over 6 years, until Middle Gorge opened on the 26th of August 2018. It's a relatively open station, and it's actually where my profile photo comes from. Whittlesea. Whittlesea station was placed in this field. Not really a field anymore. The station was the terminus for Victorian railway services. The facilities were relatively standard, 4 sidings and a turntable. The 4 sidings lasted until 1958, when the 4 was reduced to 2. The building no longer survives, but it was a relatively quaint weatherboard building, with this metal shed, which people always think was this metal shed off of Plenty Road. Now, I specifically mentioned Victorian railway services, as the line doesn't actually stop there. The Kings Lake Tramway was a 3-foot gauge tramway, and at its peak had 2 lines, one to Flowerdale and one to Kings Lake. The tramway served several timber mills in the area. I'll cover the tramway in more detail in another video, but basically, the tramway didn't have your standard metal rails. Instead, the rails were made of timber, and the network carried timber from the various timber mills to Whittlesea. Whittlesea had a dedicated siding for these timber deliveries. By 1925, the line was pretty much done, and also suffering financial troubles, it closed fully in 1926. Whittlesea station survived for another 30 years before being closed on the 8th of November 1959, and pretty much nothing remains of it today. Where it is today, the Whittlesea line has slowly been built back over the decades, since 1959. The line was re-extended to Epping in 1964, then South Morang in 2012, and finally to Mernda in 2018, about 9 kilometers shy of the former terminus. Since the 1950s, many things on the line have changed. Besides the obvious truncations, none of the original buildings or infrastructure survived beyond Thomaston. All tracks beyond Keon Park were formerly single track. However, as part of the South Morang extension and Mernda extension, all tracks on the line is now fully double track. Today, the operational section sees frequent-ish suburban trains, about 20 minutes off-peak. It's now relatively busy, and you may say that the line was opened ahead of its time. However, at the time, railways existed to develop undeveloped areas. So even though the line seemed useless back then, the suburban line to Mernda probably wouldn't even be necessary or even exist in the modern world. Will services resume? Clearly, services did resume for a good portion of the line. However, the section from Mernda to Whittlesea still remains closed. While Whittlesea does have a sizable population of around 7,000, the area in between is mostly open countryside. So until urban sprawl eventually reaches Yanyin, it's highly unlikely that the suburban line will be re-extended to Whittlesea anytime soon. The former right-of-way is still owned by the government, so it could happen. That was the former Whittlesea line. While there was a good reason for closure back in the 50s, I think the decision is very short-sighted today. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked this video. If you have any other suggestions for any other lines, leave them in the comments below. If not, I'll see you later.